Well, I have a book to share with you all today. And as you can probably tell by the cover of the book, this is a book called Red. It's a crayons story. So this is in a world where crayons live. This is a story called Red because he was red. There he is. He is red. But he wasn't very good at it. Red wasn't. Yeah. His teacher thought he needed more practice. His best friend, Scarlet, tried to help him out. So they said, I'll draw a red strawberry. Then you draw a red strawberry. You can do this. Really? But he couldn't really. Yeah. His mother, Olive, thought he needed to mix with other colors. So she arranged a play date with Red's friend, Yellow. And she said, you two go out and draw a nice round orange. Because, of course, red and yellow make orange, right? Do we know that? Do we know our colors? Do they teach colors anymore in school? Do they? So they went out, but they made a big greenish one. Yeah, oops. His grandparents, Silver and Gray, thought that he wasn't warm enough. So they gave Red a nice, warm, red scarf for him to wear the day at school when the kids drew their self-portraits for PTA night. Do they still have PTA night? PTO night. See? Okay. So his grandparents were very excited to see the portrait of Red in his red scarf. Oh dear me, said Silver to Gray. I love how they're just down to little stubs, Silver and Gray. Oh dear. His crayon classmates all seemed to have something to say. Well, Amber said, sometimes I wonder if he's really red at all. Hazelnut said, don't be silly, it says red right on his label. Cocoa Bean said, he came that way from the factory. Fuchsia said, frankly, I don't think he's very bright. Grape said, well, I think he's lazy. Army Green said, right, he's got to press harder. Steel Gray said, really apply himself. Sunshine said, give him a try. He'll catch on. Sea Green said, of course he will. But he didn't catch on. In art class, Green drew a green frog. Black sketched a black sheep. Brown colored a brown cow. And Red drew a red ant. All the art supplies wanted to help. The masking tape thought he was broken inside and tried wrapping his label tight. The scissors thought his label was too tight and gave him a couple of carefully delivered snips. The pencil tried feeding Red into a sharpener to see if that would help. But even with all their help and with all Red's hard work, Red continued in Red's way. He just couldn't get the hang of it. Well, one day he met a new friend named Barry. And Barry said, will you make a blue ocean for my boat? Red said, I can't. I'm red. But Barry said, will you give it a try? So Red gave it a try. And guess what? It was perfect. And Red didn't stop there. Bluebells, blue jeans, bluebird, blueberries, blue whale. Red said, I'm blue. He was blue. Everyone was talking about it. His mother, Olive, said, my son is brilliant. Amber said, who could have known he was blue? Hazelnut said, I always said he was blue. Cocoa Bean said, it was obvious. Barry said, his blue ocean really lifted me. Sea Green said, all of his work makes me happy. Brown said, his blue strawberries are my favorites. Apple Green said, he's so intense. Yellow said, I'm going to make a green lizard with him, a really big one. His grandmother, Gray, said, I hear he's working on a huge new project. And his best friend, Scarlet, said, he's really reaching for the sky. And he really was. And that is the story of Red. Yeah. So the best thing a person can do is to be themselves. That's right. Honestly and opening, brave and beautiful, and letting your light shine out so that other people can feel your light gives other people the courage to be themselves. Right? No one of us are the same, but we all share something in common. We all want to be loved, right? So love yourselves first, and then share your beauty, just like Red did. So I ask that you continue to hold the story of Red in mind as I deliver some words this morning. Unitarian Universalist minister and best-selling author Robert Fulghum recounts being left in charge of 80 children aged 10 and below at a church function and engaging them in a game of giants, wizards, and elves. Now, this is a sort of rock, paper, scissors activity writ large, with children performing one of the three identities for a series of face-offs in which giants beat elves, elves beat wizards, and wizards beat giants. So Fulghum instructed the kids, which are you? A giant, a wizard, or an elf? Decide now. Well, as the children prepared to launch into embodying one of these magical creatures, Fulghum felt a tug on his pant leg, and as he bent down to attend to the young child's request, he heard, "Excuse me, where do the mermaids stand?" When Fulghum explained that there were no mermaids, the child, determined, responded matter-of-factly, "Oh yes, I am one." Well, Fulghum recalls that he had the presence of mind in the moment to respond something to the effect that mermaids should stand right next to the king of the sea, indicating himself, but later, upon reflection, he realized the poignancy of the child's question. Where do the mermaids stand? In other words, how does one fully participate in life when the categories of identity on offer don't seem to encompass the felt essence of one's soul? Fulghum understood that a creative answer to that question was the kernel from which a better world could be cultivated. The figure of the mermaid is a potent one for gender non-conforming children in our culture today. As Diane Ehrensaft, one of the leading psychologists specializing in counseling those children and their parents, makes clear, she writes, "In my work with transgender little girls and gender fluid little boys, particularly gender hybrids, one kind of body on top, another on the bottom, mermaids are indeed popular and makes total sense. Fluidity, hybridity, trans identity, the vocabulary for gender designation, or indeed for opting out thereof, is running apace with the diverse emergence of a veritable movement in our culture." Edgardo Menville, a psychologist colleague of Diane Ehrensaft, puts the work of advocacy for gender nonconforming children squarely in the hands of those who guarantee the social grounds of children's development. He says, "Knowing that children who deviate from gender mandates are susceptible to social exclusion, we must instead learn to support our children as they walk through social minefields, figuring out their own steps. A person's gender is no more than, and no less than, a creative individual achievement. And yet, it can only develop through social exchange." So the paramount task of advocacy, then, is no longer in aiding children to better approximate rigid, culturally defined gender identity codes. The more present challenge toward which our efforts must be directed is the careful attunement of the social exchange in which individual gender achievements are realized. Whether we be parents, guardians, teachers, ministers, youth group leaders, or indeed members of congregations interested in working with and providing sanctuary for and advocacy for families of gender nonconforming children and for transgender and gender fluid persons of all ages. This is no mean task. So Ehrensaft, in her field-defining book, Gender Born, Gender Made, Raising Healthy Gender Nonconforming Children, she issues a strong word of encouragement, yes, also of warning to those pursuing child psychotherapy with an emphasis in gender dysphoria abatement. She warns that the workload will be at least 3 times the individual work with adults. For to become a child therapist working with transgender or gender nonconforming children is also to become a child advocate. For such children will only do as well as the school and community does in supporting them, to ensure that the children are enveloped in a social network of safety, security, acceptance, and gender creativity. I would add that the community of which Ehrensaft speaks includes vitally those places of worship where gender creative children and their parents might find refuge and spiritual nourishment. As medical technologies become more available, allowing a postponement of pubertal onset until gender nonconforming children can be secure in their core gender affirmation, it is certainly the case that both the onus and the privilege fall to parents to stand alongside their children and to make situation-appropriate medical decisions on their behalf. What we pastorally minded professionals and congregants can do is to become more versed in the existence of these technologies so as to provide sounding boards for those families in need of our welcome and our ongoing care. And this will represent, for many of us, a not easy transition in thinking. Getting onto a learning curve that begins with understanding being transgender as a normal variance of human expression. For your 5th anniversary as a fellowship, you have made a conscious decision to focus on spiritual growth. So I'm suggesting that a realignment of our notions of what gender is or can be, combined with an intentional effort to ally ourselves with those different from us, provides us with powerful tools for our own spiritual evolution as individuals and as congregations dedicated to the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Diane Ehrensaft's concept of gender creativity stems from the fact that gender has significantly different meanings for different people. So she articulates a model to help us relearn gender, and she's upfront about the fact that such a reframing will be required, necessary for all of us. So thoroughly are ourselves saturated with conceptions of gender tied neatly to equally tidy notions of sex. She first argues that we need to move beyond notions of deviance or even variance. And then she similarly eschews the model of a gender spectrum because of its inherent two-dimensional horizontality as a metaphor. Rather, Ehrensaft conceives of a gender web deployed in three dimensionalities, side to side as well as up and down. So this gender web encompasses any particular child's assigned gender, so that which appears on the birth certificate, the child's gender expressions, so those feelings, behaviors, attitudes, activities that communicate to both the self and other one's presentation of self as either male, female, or other, and the child's core gender identity, the inner sense of self as male, female, or other. Of course, the majority of people discover a largely adequate fit among assigned, expressed, and core gender. Many, however, do not. And these latter are the children who belong to Ehrensaft's purposefully elastic category of gender creative, a developmental position in which the child transcends the cultural's normative definitions of male-female to creatively interweave a sense of gender that comes neither totally from the inside, the body, the psyche, nor totally from the outside, the culture, others' perceptions of the child's gender, but resides somewhere in between. So the figure of the mermaid is an apt symbol for this in-between existence. Although gender creativity would embrace a more expansive realm of possibilities than that available to the mermaids of lore. Even the term transgender can become constricting in this new world of gender creativity, for in its suggestion of movement, of transitioning from one place to another, transgender is tied to the gender binary from which many people feel themselves dislocated, indeed freed. In fact, the various hybrids, fluidities, and cross-identified gender selves that can and do exist in this moment of time and culture are designations often sequentially employed within the lifespans of individuals as they develop, shift, adapt, and claim their selfhoods. But importantly, and different from almost any other identity-based minority population, gender-creative children have an additional mark against them in that they face aspersion from their very own family, loved ones who are supposed to be their protectors. Congregations are uniquely poised environments in which to extend support and care to gender nonconforming children and their legal guardians. It is surely an exercise in understatement to suggest that religious bodies have done a less than adequate job of providing some of the protective sanctuary gender-fluid people may need to aid them in finding their true gender selves. In fact, some of the worst violence threatened and realized has taken shape in the context of conservative religious communities. In a biblically based world in which God has created only man and woman, the gender creative child serves as a living rupture to the perceived natural order of things. We can all do better. We are all called to provide a place for gender nonconforming persons to stand in their hard-won authenticities. Felicitously, there does appear to be an emerging cultural narrative that is positively conspiring to help us in embracing a more gender-creative impulse, although it regrettably comes too late for too many. One longs for a world in which there would no longer be a need for the now annual International Transgender Day of Remembrance, which commemorates victims of anti-transgender violence. The tragically frequent incidents of transgender teen suicide, coupled with a documented high rate of violence against nonconforming people of all ages, suggests strongly that access to gender creativity is poised at a point where life itself is on the line. It is from this knowledge that Ehrensaft and others are crafting a course forward for gender creative parenting, the skills for which are transferable to pastoral modalities and to congregational dynamics. So I want to share the charge Ehrensaft gives to parents who would transcend the often negative responses to their social norms transgressing transgender children. Because this morning I want to instruct as well as inspire. Among religious faith traditions, Unitarian Universalism is at the very forefront of advocacy for and inclusion of transgender persons of all ages. Yet, rigid notions of gender are so entrenched in our self-understandings that it can be challenging to see through a new lens. Ehrensaft writes, "If transformation trumps transphobia, the child stands a good chance of emerging with a positive gender identity. If, on the other hand, transphobia and trauma run transformation into the ground, the child may be left with a bruised and battered psyche, a contorted self, and even a wish not to be around anymore." Achieving transformation requires work on the part of all of us, I suggest, striving toward gender creative sensibilities. It is so very often the religious or philosophical beliefs just embedded within us that make the difference between surrendering to coercive legislation of children's gender outcomes and a transformative negotiation of our internalized gender strictures so as to become the allies gender nonconforming children need so desperately. I want to emphasize the 4 vital tools Ehrensaft urges on us in order to stand alongside our children, and I would add, in order to stand alongside those many adults who, not having had the emerging advances in science and awareness, have come to their gender creative identities later in post-pubertal life. Many of us are lucky to have such people in our congregations or in our communities who can lead from their experience. But as some of the voiced reactions to gender-inclusive restrooms attest, even within UU congregations that I've been a part of, these issues trigger themes deep within each of us. The wave of legislative battles that has swept across many southern states points not only to the necessity for protecting the very rights many of the states are attempting to remove or prevent, but also to the very deep place in each of us that is touched by issues of gender identity. Jody this morning shared with me she works for ETS, Educational Testing Services, and of course the language of the questions on all of those standardized tests are always in negotiation. And there's been a desire to reflect some of this gender creativity in the way that the language is used, including using the pronoun they and their in a singular manner, which you can imagine for ETS and those folks in charge of grammar and that kind of thing. I mean, this is a leading edge. And at the table, and this before she knew what the sermon was about today. She was just sharing with me before the service. She said, the other person on the committee just spoke up and she said, I'm not sure we should really be aiding and abetting mental illness here. So these are very present battles. So here are the 4 simple sounding, yet deeply difficult emotional tools that we all need to work on. And you'll see that these will not only help us to become better advocates, they will help us become better situated people in our own skins. And that's a good thing. First, Ehrensaft says we need to achieve personal success in working through and feeling comfortable in our own gender authenticity, whatever that may be. To the extent that we can live non-reactively in our own bodies, the difference represented by the authenticities of others in our midst can exist alongside us without representing a threat to our own. So much of the discomfort I have, frankly, with gender nonconforming lives is tied to my own lived through dramas of gender adherence. All those times I wasn't walking right, or holding my school books right, or speaking with the right inflections, or having the right interests, or liking the right music. All those times I squelched my natural impulses have built up in me an often unconscious resentment toward anyone who has the courage to just be themselves. It's my own loss that I need to work through. The second tool Ehrensaft articulates is especially important for parents, and that's the capacity to stay steady when the going gets rough. Not letting yourself get bowled over by anxiety or head for the hills when you see conflict coming your way, even from within yourself or between yourself and someone else. Each of us needs to be better equipped to remain calm in the face of low self-differentiation among those in our care and among the authorities with whom we are in negotiation for children's safety and well-being. When we achieve self-differentiation, when we have worked through the ghosts of our own struggles and missed opportunities, we can remain strong in the face of others who perhaps just haven't had the reason or the awareness to work through theirs. This is a long-term project. It will take time and patience on our part. Third, Ehrensaft emphasizes the capacity to decenter. That means taking the focus off yourself, seeing your child or a child in the congregation as a separate person, not a mini ambassador for our parenting or for our own internally held values. Decentering means reflecting and organizing around their needs rather than your own. We do not own our children, even our own. They are not accessories to our personal needs. Rather, we take on the responsibility for the care of often radically different sensibilities in the form of the children who are born to us and to those around us. Fourth and finally, Ehrensaft emphasizes something that, while present as a subtext of our UU principles, is never stated in words among them. We need bonds of love, bonds so stalwart that they transcend all other adversities that come our way. With a secure attachment upon which our children can rely comes the ability to stand by them, even in the face of, in the case of gender creative children, what may be a cruel reception by others. Do you sing that song sometimes, "There is more love somewhere"? There is more love somewhere. I'm going to keep on until I find it. I've always pictured that love, as existing, out there, somewhere, waiting to be found, right? I wonder what would happen, and maybe we'll try it right now, if we sang, "There is more love in me. There is more love in me. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love in me." I doubt many of us have experienced the series of affronts that gender nonconforming children and their parents experience navigating their ways through the various systems, educational, health, religious, social policy, that are in theory meant to provide the basic support that children need to grow into themselves with dignity. Let's find more love in ourselves to help stay their course. Ultimately, perhaps the most challenging thing about gender creative parenting is just not knowing exactly how things will turn out for you or your child. So I'll end again with words of Diane Ehrensaft. A child's gender development is always a work in progress. As much as we know about how the gender web works, much still remains a mystery. To be gender creative is not just to allow yourself room to roam and ruminate. Being creative is also to be able to tolerate suspending yourself in a state of not knowing. The fact is that most gender variant children are not transgender. They have varying degrees of atypical expression and self-presentation, but it is primarily their social gender that is non-conforming, rather their internal sense of gender. And more as our cultural mores shift, children are experimenting with their gender expressions in ways that fly in the face of the idea that gender is determined at birth and remains rigidly in place over time. Much is yet to be revealed to us. What seems clear to me, however, is that these children need our support. And the more non-conforming they are, the greater the need. Despite the misgivings we may feel, we need to be able to separate them from our duties as parents, ministers, loving congregations. It is completely expectable to feel bewildered, angry, sad, disheartened. These feelings will change over time, and they need to be felt. But remember that we are Unitarian Universalists, and that our child rearing, our pastoral ministry, and our congregational life does not wait for us to catch up emotionally. It remains our job to create homes, classrooms, and sanctuaries full of love, support, safety, and nurturance. It is past time to move toward a more gender-creative pastoral sensibility in our places of worship and beyond. Where do the Mermaids stand? It is my hope that with an increased gender-creative pastoral sensibility, the Mermaids in our midst can more freely stand wherever their hybrid hearts desire. This sermon is but one tentative gesture of my gender-creative determination to do ever better in providing a place for the authentic selves of gender nonconforming people in our communities to emerge in their own time, over time, to give them a place to stand.
Amen.